He woke up that morning believing it would be the last time he'd ever walk his land. The frost clung to the barn roof like it was holding on tighter than he could. Every breath he took turned into a cloud that hung in the cold December air, fading just like the future he once dreamed of. His name was Thomas Grady, a third-generation farmer from southern Wisconsin. 58 years old. Calloused hands, sun-worn skin, and a heart that had known nothing but soil, sweat, and sacrifice. This land had been in his family for nearly a century, and today he was about to sign it away. But before the pen met the paper, before the lawyer opened the folder, before the deal was sealed forever, he picked up a shovel, and everything changed. This isn't just a story about a man and his land. It's about a hidden truth that slept beneath his feet for generations, and what happens when you dig a little deeper, both into the earth and into your past. But to understand how we got here, you need to understand how bad things had become. 3 years of failed crops. A broken tractor that cost more to fix than it was worth. Prices dropping. Costs rising. The bank stopped returning his calls. His wife had passed 5 winters ago. And his daughter? She lived 3 states away, working a desk job, barely able to visit once a year. The world had moved on. Farming was dying. And so was the dream. Thomas had resisted every offer that came in. Developers wanted to pave over the fields and build condos. A solar company offered a buyout to turn the land into an energy farm. One man even wanted to dig for sand. Each time, Thomas said no. But last month, he said maybe. It wasn't greed. It wasn't weakness. It was survival. The bills piled up. Property taxes overdue. The bank sent a final notice. If he didn't sell, he'd lose everything and walk away with nothing. So, he called back the last buyer. A businessman from Milwaukee. Smooth talking. Expensive watch. Firm handshake. He offered just enough to cover the debt, with a little left over to rent a small apartment in town. Thomas agreed. The papers were drawn up. The closing date was set. December 12th. And this was that day. But just before he left the house to meet the lawyer, he did something he hadn't done in months. He walked his land. Not out of duty. Not to check the soil. But because he needed to say goodbye. He walked past the rusted tractor that hadn't started in over a year. He passed the half-fallen fence where the cattle used to roam. The wind carried the scent of frozen grass and old wood. It didn't feel like a farewell. It felt like mourning. And then something caught his eye. A patch of ground, out past the old barn. A small rise in the dirt, almost like a mound, barely noticeable. But it hadn't been there before. He squinted. Took a few steps closer. Kneeled. Touched the soil. It was softer than the frozen earth around it. He stood up, walked back to the shed, and grabbed an old shovel. The one his father used when Thomas was just a boy. Its handle was cracked. The metal dull. But it still worked. And then, he started to dig. What he found next. It wasn't gold. It wasn't oil. It wasn't treasure, at least not in the way most people think. But it was something. Something ancient. Something buried. Something that had waited a long, long time to be seen again. And in that moment, standing alone with dirt on his boots and cold in his lungs, Thomas Grady made a decision that would change the rest of his life. He stopped digging. He called someone. And he canceled the meeting. Because some things aren't meant to be sold. And this was just the beginning. Now you're going to witness a story that almost never came to light. A story about loss, legacy, and the moment when giving up turned into digging deeper. So don't go anywhere, because what was buried in that field was far more than just dirt. It was truth. And the truth, as you're about to see, changes everything. They say you can tell a lot about a man by the soil under his nails. If that's true, then Thomas Grady carried generations in his hands. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. But in his corner of rural Wisconsin, everyone knew the Grady farm. And everyone knew Tom. Born in 1965, Thomas came into the world the same year his father expanded the cornfields by 20 acres. His mother used to joke that Tom's crib wasn't in a nursery, but in the hayloft. While other kids learned to walk on sidewalks, Tom learned on muddy trails between the chicken coop and the barn. His family had owned that land since 1917. It started with his grandfather, Daniel Grady, an Irish immigrant who came to Wisconsin chasing the dream of land ownership. No money, no title, just grit. He bought 40 acres with a handshake and a promise. Over the years, the farm grew. So did the family. And by the time Tom was born, the Grady name meant something in town. Tom was a good kid. Quiet. Observant. He wasn't the kind to complain, not even when the work was hard, which was always. He helped with chores before school, cleaned out stalls on weekends, and took over full-time after his father's first heart attack when Tom was just 19. He had chances to leave. A scholarship offer after high school. A cousin in Chicago with a job opening. Even the army recruiter gave it a try. But he stayed. Not because he was scared to go, but because he believed in something bigger than himself. "I always figured this land would be here long after I was gone," he once told a neighbor. "Might as well do right by it while I'm still kicking." He married young. Sarah, his high school sweetheart. Kind eyes, tougher than she looked, and always knew how to stretch a dollar. Together they raised their only daughter, Emma, in the same house Tom was born in. Family dinners, 4th of July fireworks, school plays, they made it all work, even when it shouldn't have. But life has a way of testing even the strongest foundations. The early 2000s brought drought. Then came flooding. Crop insurance didn't cover everything. Then the market crashed. Prices tanked. Equipment broke down faster than he could fix it. Sarah was diagnosed with cancer in 2015. She passed quietly in the fall of that year, under the same maple tree where they'd first kissed back in '82. After that, Tom changed. He still worked the land, still kept the fences mended and the animals fed. But the laughter disappeared. He moved slower, spoke less. The sparkle in his eyes dimmed. Emma, grown now with a family of her own, called often but rarely visited. She had her own struggles, her own life. Tom never blamed her. But he missed her more than he'd admit. Neighbors offered help. Some offered to buy him out, just to ease the burden. He always refused. Until last November. That's when the letter came. Certified. Official. Cold. Final foreclosure notice. The bank was done waiting. The last lifeline had snapped. That's when he made the call. He didn't want to. Every word on that call felt like swallowing gravel. But pride doesn't feed you. And it sure doesn't pay the taxes. The buyer wasn't local. He didn't know the story. Didn't care about the generations who built something from nothing. To him, it was just acreage. An investment. A blank slate. Tom agreed to meet him. And after 2 short visits, it was done. Just like that. Almost 100 years of blood, calluses, and memory, reduced to a transaction. But the night before the closing, Tom couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the barn his grandfather built by hand. The tree Sarah planted in the backyard. The spot near the fence line where Emma buried her first puppy. None of that would mean anything to the man with the expensive watch and the clean boots. And that's when it hit him. He wasn't just giving up land. He was giving up history. Something about that thought sat wrong in his bones. And when the sun rose, he did something he hadn't done in months. He put on his boots, walked out the door, and went back to where it all began. Not knowing that fate had left something buried. Just waiting for the right moment to be found. It didn't happen overnight. Thomas Grady didn't just wake up one day and decide to sell his family's legacy. It was a slow unraveling, a steady erosion of hope, season after season, year after year. The first crack started back in 2010, when his combine broke down during harvest. He didn't have the cash to fix it, so he leased one. The interest was brutal, but he figured it'd be a one-time thing. It wasn't. The next year, the rains came too late. The year after that, they came too hard. Corn prices plummeted. Soybeans too. Tariffs. Market shifts. The cost of seed, fuel, parts, they all rose while his profits vanished into the wind. Tom cut every corner he could. Skipped repairs. Bought used parts. Sold off equipment. Skipped a season planting wheat because the numbers just didn't add up. He even leased part of his back pasture to a neighbor for cattle. Something his father would have never allowed. The Grady farm had once been the pride of Jackson County. Now it was just hanging on by the roots. And Tom was tired. Not the kind of tired a nap could fix. The kind that burrows deep into your bones. The kind that makes everything feel heavier than it should. His hands shook sometimes. He had a cough that wouldn't quit. He told himself it was just the cold. Just age. But deep down, he knew the truth. The farm wasn't the only thing breaking down. Then came the letters. Final notices. Late fees. Property tax threats. He started keeping unopened envelopes in a drawer. Couldn't bring himself to read them. What was the point? They all said the same thing. Time was running out. It was during one particularly cold evening in October that the call came. Tom had just finished his dinner, beans on toast, cheap coffee, and silence. The phone rang, and for a moment, he almost let it go to voicemail. But he answered. Mr. Grady? My name's David Kessler. I represent a client who's interested in purchasing your land. Tom didn't speak. Full cash offer. No contingencies. Quick closing. I understand you're facing some financial difficulties. We believe we can help both parties walk away satisfied. Tom almost hung up, but something in the man's voice made him pause. It wasn't friendly, it was efficient. Like this wasn't the first call he'd made that day. Or the 10th. How much? Tom finally asked. Kessler gave him a number. It was low. Too low. But not insulting. Just enough to sting, just enough to tempt. We can have contracts drawn up by the end of the week. No pressure, of course. But offers like this don't stay on the table forever. Tom didn't say yes. But he didn't say no either. He hung up and stared at the wall for an hour. He told himself he was just thinking, weighing options. But a part of him knew the decision had already begun. A few days later, the man showed up. Slick car. Pressed suit. Smelled like cologne and confidence. He shook Tom's hand like he was closing a deal before it even started. Walked the property with a clipboard and quiet judgment. This is good land, he said once. Flat. Prime for development. Could be a small community here. Townhomes, maybe a commercial lot. Lot of potential. Tom said nothing. He watched as the man's boots left clean marks in the mud, untouched by work. They sat at the kitchen table. Look, Kessler said. You're not the only one struggling. Farms across the state are folding faster than you'd believe. Times are changing. You could keep fighting, sure. But to what end? You've done your part. Maybe it's time to let the land do something else. Tom hated how reasonable he sounded. And that was the worst part. He wasn't wrong. What was left to fight for? No one was coming to save the family farm. There was no miracle on the horizon. No secret grant or late-season harvest. There was just debt. And snow. And silence. Tom nodded. Send the papers. It was done. Just like that. The day was set, December 12th. He had 30 days to say goodbye. He didn't tell Emma right away. He didn't tell anyone. He just started packing up small things. Tools. Photos. A few boxes of books. The old Bible from his father. Every drawer he opened carried memories. Every creak of the floor reminded him of footsteps that were no longer there. Sometimes, at night, he'd sit on the porch and look out over the field. The frost glistened under the moonlight like diamonds on a cold grave. He tried not to cry. But some nights he failed. And then, the night before the closing, he had a dream. He was walking the land. Only this time it wasn't cold. It was spring. His father was there. So was his grandfather. Even Sarah. They stood by the old fence line, smiling, saying nothing. Just watching. He woke up before sunrise. And he couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. Something wasn't right. And that is when he decided to walk the land one last time. The sun wasn't even up yet when Thomas Grady stepped out onto his porch. The cold hit his face like a slap. Sharp, honest, and unforgiving. The kind of cold that didn't ask permission. It just took. But he didn't flinch. He just breathed it in, slow and steady, letting it burn through his lungs like firewood smoke. This wasn't a walk for nostalgia. He didn't carry a coffee mug or a camera. No farewell speech to the barn, no long goodbye to the fields. He simply walked, boots crunching on frost, hands shoved deep in worn-out pockets, eyes scanning the land like it was the last time he'd ever see it, and maybe it was. Past the tool shed, past the collapsed fence where the cows used to lean, past the windmill that hadn't turned since 2012. Every step stirred memories he wasn't asking for. There was the maple where Sarah hung the swing for Emma. The ditch where a storm washed out the driveway back in '93. The row of broken stakes where they tried and failed to grow strawberries. And then he saw it. At first, it looked like nothing. Just a weird lump in the earth. A slight rise. Barely noticeable unless you knew the land like he did. And Tom knew every bump, every rock, every stubborn root on that property. But this was new. It wasn't there last month. Or the month before. And it sure as hell hadn't been there for the past 50 years. Something about it itched. Not physically. Mentally. Like it was pulling at the back of his mind, whispering, "Go look." He walked over slowly. The wind had stilled. The silence was so heavy it felt sacred. He knelt down and brushed the frost off the dirt. The soil was soft. Softer than it should have been. The ground should have been frozen this time of year. Solid as rock. But here? It gave under his fingertips. Loose. Fresh. He stood up, walked back to the shed, and grabbed a shovel. Not the new one, if you could even call anything he owned new. He grabbed the old one. The one with the splintered handle and the worn-out blade. The one his father had used when Tom was just a boy, digging holes for fence posts in the dead of summer. He walked back to the mound. No hesitation. No ceremony. Just grit. And he dug. 1 foot down, then 2. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe just distraction. Or maybe, some part of him believed that dream he had wasn't just a dream. Then the shovel hit something. A clink. Not sharp like metal on rock, but hollow. Almost deliberate. He paused. Kneeling, he cleared away dirt with his hands. Careful now. Gentle. And then he saw it. Wood. Not new. Not recent. This was aged. Dark, cracked, sealed shut by time. It looked like a box. Not large, maybe 2 feet wide, covered in earth and roots. His hands trembled as he unearthed more of it. Not from cold, but something else, something deeper. He cleared the last layer of dirt, heart pounding. Then he stood still. Not moving. Just breathing. What the hell is this? He whispered to no one. He looked around, half expecting someone to be watching, but there was no one. Just him, the wind, and a box that shouldn't be there. He didn't open it. Not yet. He sat down next to it instead, right there in the dirt. Like the land had asked him to sit a while. Like it wasn't done with him just yet. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Time didn't matter anymore. Eventually, he picked up the box. It wasn't heavy, but it had weight. The kind of weight you feel in your chest. He brought it back to the house. Cleaned it off in the sink. Dirt washed away in thick, slow streaks, revealing something stranger. Symbols. Not words. Not numbers. But carved lines, patterns burned into the wood. Not by accident. Not by nature. Somebody made this. A long time ago. He set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Part of him wanted to open it. Another part felt like maybe he shouldn't. But curiosity has a way of ignoring fear. So, with hands that had planted and harvested and buried too many things to count, Tom slowly opened the box. And what he found inside? It wasn't gold. It wasn't money. It wasn't anything that would make the evening news. But it would change everything. Inside the box, there were no diamonds, no gold coins, no lost deeds or secret wills. Nothing a bank would care about. Nothing a developer could flip into profit. But what Thomas Grady found inside was stranger than anything he'd ever seen. The first thing he noticed was the smell, aged leather, musty paper, and something older, almost metallic. Time had lived inside that box for a very long time. There were 3 objects. The first was a bundle of papers, folded neatly and tied with a ribbon so faded it looked gray. The second was a pendant, round, iron, heavy, with an unfamiliar symbol etched into the surface. And the third? A photograph. Tom picked up the photo with shaking fingers. It was black and white. Frayed edges. A man standing in front of what looked like a barn. But not his. The man looked like he was from the early 1900s. Maybe earlier. He wore overalls, a wide-brim hat, and held a shovel in his right hand. But it wasn't the man that caught Tom's attention. It was his face. The resemblance was uncanny. Same nose. Same jawline. Same heavy eyes. Tom whispered, "Is that?" But he couldn't finish the question. He looked closer. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, were 4 words. He knew. We buried it. No name. No date. No explanation. Just a message that raised more questions than it answered. He set the photo down and reached for the bundle of papers. Carefully, he undid the ribbon, and the pages unfolded like brittle wings. They were journal entries. Handwritten. The ink had bled in places, the paper yellowed and cracked. But the writing, still legible, spoke of events he'd never heard about. Mentions of strange lights in the sky above the fields. Whispers of people who came and went in the night. A discovery, near the old elm that should have never been unearthed. One passage stood out. If you're reading this, then it means the land has called to you too. We buried the truth not to hide it, but to protect it. From them. From ourselves. Don't trust the men in suits. They already know it's here. Tom felt his stomach turn. The words didn't make sense. And yet they did. He remembered the strange sounds at night when he was a boy. Low hums he thought were just tractors from miles away. The way animals avoided the far edge of the property. The stories his grandfather used to tell after one too many drinks, about something old sleeping under the farm. Stories Tom had laughed at. Until now. He picked up the pendant next. It was heavier than it looked. Cold, even in his warm hands. The symbol etched into it didn't match anything he recognized. A circle, broken in 4 parts, each segment carved with tiny markings like code. When he touched the center of it, something strange happened. He felt it. Not heat. Not movement. Pressure. Like a quiet, invisible push against his chest. Not painful. Not even physical. But undeniable. Like something wanted to be remembered. Tom sat back in his chair, the pendant resting on the table. He stared at the objects in front of him, the photo, the journal, the strange medallion, and tried to piece it together. This wasn't a time capsule. It wasn't a prank. It was a message, left behind for someone specific. For him? He couldn't be sure. But deep down, a part of him believed it. The dream. The land pulling him back. The sudden appearance of the mound. It all felt too connected to ignore. He thought about the man in the photo. The one who looked like him. Was that his great-grandfather? Some unknown ancestor? Why bury these items and leave such a cryptic trail? And who were they? The men in suits. Just a metaphor? Or something more real than he'd like to admit? Tom felt the walls of the old farmhouse close in. The wind outside picked up, slapping the shutters against the siding. Suddenly, selling the farm didn't just feel like giving up. It felt like betrayal. He stood up, picked up the box, and carried it into the living room. He set it on the fireplace mantel, above the spot where Sarah's photo still sat. And then, without saying a word, he picked up the phone. He dialed the number of the lawyer handling the sale. When the man answered, Tom didn't explain. He just said, "Cancel it." A pause. "You sure, Mr. Grady? That contract." "I said cancel it. I'm not selling. Not anymore." He hung up. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was calm, because whatever he'd just uncovered, it was his to protect. And he had a feeling this was only the beginning. It didn't take long for the news to get out. Small towns are like that. Secrets don't stay buried, even when they're 6 feet under and sealed inside a box no one was supposed to find. The morning after Thomas Grady canceled the sale, people started talking. At first, it was just the real estate agent, confused, frustrated. He told a friend, who told a cousin, who told the lady who ran the diner in town. By lunchtime, whispers were moving faster than delivery trucks down County Road 6. Tom Grady called off the deal. Wait, after all that? He was days away from losing the place. He must have gotten cold feet. No, I heard he found something. Buried on the property. What kind of something? Something old. Weird. Maybe even dangerous. No one had facts. Just fragments. Speculation filled in the rest. By Friday, cars started slowing down as they passed the Grady farm. People craned their necks, trying to see what they couldn't. A few even pulled into the driveway, pretending to be lost or looking for someone. Tom didn't answer the door. And then came the unmarked vehicles. 2 of them. Black. Clean. Parked at the edge of the property line, but never came up the drive. They just sat there. 2 men inside, sunglasses on, watching. For hours. When Tom finally walked out to confront them, they were gone. No tire marks. No trace. That's when he knew, whatever he'd found wasn't just interesting. It was being watched. He called Emma. It had been months since they'd spoken beyond a few quick texts. When she answered, her voice was guarded, half asleep. "Dad, is everything okay? I need you to come home." A pause. "Is it your health?" "No. It's not that. It's the land. Something's happened." He told her about the box. The pendant. The journal. Not everything, but enough to make her pack a bag. Emma arrived the next evening, suitcase in one hand, confusion written all over her face. She walked into the farmhouse, looked at the old wooden box sitting on the mantel, and raised an eyebrow. "You called me across 3 states for this?" "Read the papers," Tom said. An hour later, she wasn't skeptical anymore. The journal entries hit her harder than she expected. Especially one line that hadn't stood out before. "If blood brought you here, then blood will keep you safe." Emma read it aloud, then looked up. "Dad, this guy sounds like he's talking directly to you." Tom nodded. "That's what I've been thinking." Word got out that Emma was back. More whispers. Some folks thought the Gratis had struck oil. Others said they found bones, something ancient. There was even a theory that it was a time capsule from the government. Or worse, from aliens. By Sunday, the sheriff stopped by. Officially, it was a welfare check. Unofficially? He was curious. Tom, he said, stepping into the kitchen. You know people are talking, right? I figured. Some say you're hiding something. Some say you've gone off the deep end. Tom handed him a copy of one of the journal entries. He read it quietly, then looked up with narrowed eyes. This a prank? I don't think so. Where'd you find it? Buried. West side of the property. The sheriff folded the page and handed it back. I don't know what this is, but if you're in trouble, you need to say it now. I'm not in trouble. Not yet. Then keep it that way. He left without another word. That night, Tom and Emma sat on the porch. The moon was full, casting long shadows across the fields. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Emma said, "What do you think's really going on here?" Tom leaned forward, elbows on knees. I don't know. But I think someone buried this for a reason. I think we were meant to find it. Why now? Maybe because I was about to give up. Maybe that was the test. Emma looked out over the land. It had always seemed ordinary to her. Pretty in the fall, dull in the winter, stubborn in the spring. But now, it felt like it was watching. 2 days later, a reporter from Madison showed up. She claimed she was working on a piece about vanishing farms, but it was clear she wanted more. I've heard rumors, she said, that you found something buried. Artifacts. Maybe something worth a lot of money. Tom shook his head. It's not for sale. Whatever it is. Mind if I take a look? I do. She didn't argue. She just left her card and a warning. If you don't tell your story, someone else will. Emma was uneasy after that. Dad, we need to be careful. You don't know who's listening. Tom nodded. Then it's time to start figuring out who we can trust. Because the land had spoken, and people were starting to listen. By the end of that week, Thomas Grady had only one thought running through his mind. If there was one box, what else might be buried? He hadn't planned on digging again. The first discovery had left him shaken, unsure whether to be grateful or afraid. But something about the journal entries lingered. The way the writer hinted at more, at deeper truths waiting to be found. We only buried what we could carry. The rest remained where it fell. So one morning, before the sun broke through the clouds, Tom and Emma walked back out to the same mound where he'd found the box. She carried a lantern. He brought a shovel. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Both of them knew this wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was obligation. It was something pulling at their blood. They started where the soil was still loose. A few inches deeper than the spot he'd stopped before. What they found next wasn't a box. It wasn't even man-made. It was stone. But not like the kind you'd find scattered across the fields. This was different. Smooth. Flat. Heavy. And covered in symbols. Same ones as the pendant. The stone was a slab, maybe 2 feet wide, but it went down further. When they tried to dig around it, they realized it wasn't alone. There were others. Interconnected. Forming something bigger. A structure, maybe. Emma ran her hand along the surface. This isn't natural. No. It's not, Tom said. This was placed here. They stood there, ankle deep in cold dirt, realizing they might be standing on the roof of something buried far below. That night, Tom didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the journal again, searching for anything that made sense. Most of the entries were rambling, scrawled thoughts, fragmented ideas, warnings written by a man who sounded more afraid of what he knew than of what might happen. But one line was underlined twice. The pit isn't a tomb. It's a lock. A lock. For what? He turned to the photograph again. That man, standing so calm in front of that strange barn. There was a scar on his cheek, barely visible. And suddenly, Tom remembered a photo that used to hang in his father's workshop. He went out to the shed and dug through an old box of frames. And there it was. Same man. Younger. No scar. And in the bottom corner, written in pencil, was a name. Jonathan Grady. 1894. Tom's great-grandfather. That was his handwriting in the journal. That was his pendant. That was his box. A message through time, meant for someone who shared his blood. Tom brought the second photo inside and showed it to Emma. Great-grandpa Jonathan? She looked back and forth between the photos, jaw tight. Dad, this isn't coincidence. He knew what he was leaving behind. And he wanted you to find it. They started digging again the next day. But this time, they did it with intention. Tom marked the slab's edges. Emma took notes, careful not to damage anything. It wasn't just a hole now, it was a site. They dug for hours, uncovering more stone, more markings. Beneath the top layer, they found a gap, just wide enough to slide a hand through. When Tom reached in, his fingers touched empty space. A hollow chamber. He pulled back quickly. Not out of fear, but reverence. "This isn't just some old foundation," he said. "This is a vault." Emma stared at it. "Then what's inside?" "I don't know," Tom said. "But I don't think we should be the ones to open it alone." That night he made a call. Not to the sheriff. Not to the press. To a woman named Dr. Janine Keller, a historical archaeologist he'd met once years ago at a county fair, when she was giving a lecture on early settler routes across Wisconsin. She picked up after the third ring. "Tom Grady? That's a name I haven't heard in a while." "I think I found something," he said. "And I need you to see it for yourself." He didn't explain much over the phone. Just gave her the address and asked her to come quickly. When he hung up, Emma was pacing. "Are you sure we can trust her?" Tom didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I trust the land. And right now, it's telling me we're in over our heads." 2 days later, Dr. Keller arrived. Smart. Sharp. Direct. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. The moment she saw the stones, her face changed. "This isn't from any indigenous group I've studied," she said quietly. "And it's definitely not settler work." "So what is it?" Emma asked. Dr. Keller looked down at the markings again, tracing one with a gloved finger. "I don't know. And that scares me a little." Tom said, "We think there's a chamber underneath. A vault of some kind." Keller nodded. "We need equipment. Ground-penetrating radar, maybe even a small team. But more importantly, we need to keep this quiet." "Too late for that," Tom muttered. She looked at him sharply. "Who else knows?" He paused. "More than I'd like." She frowned. "Then you'd better brace yourself. Because what you've found here, it doesn't want to stay hidden much longer." The deeper Thomas Grady dug, literally and figuratively, the louder the world outside became. What began as a quiet discovery had now become something much bigger than a family mystery. And people were starting to notice. The first shift came with the arrival of Dr. Keller's team. A pair of young researchers, both fresh out of graduate school, showed up with scanning equipment, clipboards, and quiet excitement. They set up tents near the dig site and began mapping the underground layout using ground-penetrating radar. Within hours, they confirmed what Tom had already suspected. "There's a chamber," one of them said. "Roughly 10 feet by 15. Maybe more. Completely sealed. Man-made. We're seeing anomalies in the ground composition, like it was reinforced. Reinforced. Not built hastily. Not buried by accident. Something was meant to stay hidden." But the moment they powered up their scanning gear, something changed in the air. Phones started acting strange. Reception dropped, even for Emma's newer model. GPS went haywire. One of the researchers' laptops crashed twice in a row. At first, it seemed like coincidence. But by the second day, even Dr. Keller looked uneasy. "This site is interfering with electronics. I've seen this before, but not on farmland." While the team worked, Tom tried to keep the peace. He told neighbors they were repairing an old drainage system. That lie didn't last long. A drone appeared over the property that evening, quiet, high watching. Tom shot it down with a shotgun blast and left the broken pieces on the mailbox for whoever sent it. The next morning, a man in a dark blue suit knocked on the door. "Mr. Grady," he said, flashing a badge Tom didn't recognize. "My name's Agent Langford. I'm with the Department of Historical Preservation." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Since when does the government care about an old farm?" Langford smiled, cold and polite. "We received a report of potential federal artifacts being uncovered. Anything buried on American soil that could pose a historical or archaeological significance falls under our jurisdiction." Tom said, "You mean you heard we found something, and now you want to take it?" The agent didn't flinch. "We'd prefer to work with you, not against you." Tom said nothing. Langford left a card on the porch railing. "Call if you change your mind. But understand, if this site poses any national interest, we won't need your permission for long." After he left, Dr. Keller flipped the card over. "There is no such department," she said. Emma crossed her arms. "So who is that?" "No idea," Keller said. "But we need to speed this up." And they did. For the next 48 hours, they worked without rest. Shifts were scheduled through the night. Every inch of the site was mapped, recorded, photographed. They found more symbols. A second stone slab. Even remnants of what looked like old metal. Tools? Locks? No one could tell for sure. But what they didn't find was a way inside. The chamber remained sealed. Silent. Waiting. And while the mystery underground deepened, pressure above ground escalated. Emma found a small camera hidden in a tree facing the dig site. It was professionally mounted. Someone had installed it during the night. A neighbor reported seeing two men walking the edge of the Grady property line with binoculars. Another neighbor, the one who'd once tried to buy the land from Tom, stopped by unannounced, pretending to check on Tom's health. "You know," he said, "if this is more than you can handle, I could still make an offer. Might even be more generous this time." Tom slammed the door before he could finish. But the message was clear. People were circling, watching, waiting, and then the final straw. Tom received a letter. No return address. Just a white envelope with his name typed cleanly on the front. Inside, there was no message. Just a photograph. A photo of the dig site, taken from above. At night, a red X marked the exact center of the slab. No signature. No threat. Just a message that said, "We see you." Tom showed it to Emma and Dr. Keller. "We need to finish what we started," Keller said. Now, that night, they decided to open the chamber. They waited until just after midnight. The wind had died down. The sky was clear and black, full of stars that looked like they were holding their breath. There was no ceremony, no audience, no officials, just Thomas Grady, Emma, Dr. Janine Keller, and two of her assistants, one holding a flashlight, the other carrying a crowbar and a heavy-duty rope. For the last 2 days, they had worked to clear the final layer of earth from the stone slab. Beneath it, their scans showed a shaft, a vertical tunnel, about 4 feet wide, descending 10, maybe 12 feet straight down before widening into the chamber below. Whatever was buried here, it had been sealed tight. No doors, no stairs, no signs of previous entry. And now they were going to be the first. "Everyone ready?" Keller asked, her voice steady but low. Emma gave a nervous nod. Tom didn't speak. He just held the pendant in his hand, the cold metal pressing into his palm. For some reason, he felt safer with it. One of the assistants positioned the crowbar between the slab and the edge of the soil. With a sharp grunt, he applied pressure. The stone didn't budge. He tried again. Still nothing. Then Tom stepped forward. "Let me." He took the crowbar and wedged it deeper, his hands moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had worked the earth his entire life. He didn't force it. He listened. He adjusted his angle. And then, with one long exhale, he pushed. The stone moved. A groan echoed from beneath them, deep and low, like something old waking up. Dust billowed into the cold night air as the slab finally shifted, sliding just enough to expose the black void below. Everyone stepped back. Emma shined the flashlight down into the opening. Nothing but darkness. Tom leaned over the edge. The air rising from the hole was cold, but not the kind of cold they were used to in Wisconsin. This cold was dry, ancient, sterile, like air that hadn't been touched in 100 years. They lowered a sensor camera into the shaft. The screen lit up with grainy black and white footage. At first, just stone walls. Dirt. More symbols. Then suddenly the chamber. Roughly 15 feet across. Circular. Stone floor. And in the center, something. Not a body. Not furniture. A pedestal. And on it, another box. Smaller than the one Tom had found. But this one was different. It glowed. Not with light. Not like electronics. But like metal reacting to air for the first time in a long time. Keller stared at the monitor. "That's not natural. That's not anything I've ever seen." Emma whispered. "What if we're not supposed to open that?" Tom didn't take his eyes off the screen. "We didn't come this far to stop now." They secured the rope. Tom insisted on going first. "You shouldn't be the one to do this," Keller said. "It's my land," Tom replied. "And I think this was left for me." He slid into the harness. His boots pressed against the edge of the shaft as he descended slowly into the dark. 10 feet. 12. His feet hit stone. He turned, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. The chamber was exactly as the camera had shown. Circular. Silent. Sealed from the outside world. It felt like a tomb, but there were no bones. No writing. No decoration. Just the pedestal. And the box. It wasn't wood. It wasn't metal. It looked like a material he couldn't identify. Smooth, black, almost glass-like, but soft around the edges like it had been molded instead of built. He stepped toward it. 1 step. 2. He stopped just a few inches away. The pendant in his pocket began to vibrate. Lightly. Faintly. He pulled it out and held it up. The symbol etched into the pendant, matched a symbol on the front of the box. A circle, broken in 4 parts. Tom reached out slowly and placed the pendant into a shallow groove on the box's surface. It clicked. The box opened. No smoke. No lights. No sudden gust of wind. Just a slow, mechanical hiss, like pressure releasing from a forgotten vault. Inside was a single object. A disc. Flat. Thin. Metallic. No buttons. No ports. No markings. Just weight. And something else. When Tom picked it up, he felt heat. Not from the object. From within himself. A surge of memories that weren't his. Flashes of faces, buildings, languages he didn't recognize. A flood of thoughts like lightning across his mind. He dropped the disc. It landed with a sharp metallic ring, but didn't break. Above, Keller's voice echoed down. Tom, are you okay? He stared up, breathing hard. I just saw something. What? I don't know. But it wasn't mine. He picked up the disc again. This time, no visions. Just silence. He placed it carefully back inside the box and climbed the rope back to the surface. When he emerged, everyone stared. Emma ran over. What happened? Tom looked at them all. Then quietly he said, This isn't just buried history. Keller asked, Then what is it? Tom looked back at the open shaft and said, I think it's a message. By morning, the wind had shifted. Something about the air felt different, not colder, but heavier. Like the earth itself was waiting to exhale. Thomas Grady sat at the kitchen table, staring at the object they had retrieved from the chamber. The disc sat between them, smooth and still, like it hadn't just hijacked his mind with images of places and people he couldn't explain. Dr. Keller paced the room, flipping through her notes, cross-referencing symbols, looking for any scrap of information that might make sense of what they'd found. But there was nothing. No language I know, she finally said. No markings, no data interface. It's not electronic, at least not in any conventional way. Emma leaned in. Then what is it? A key? A map? Tom shook his head slowly. It's a memory. They looked at him. I don't know how to explain it, he said. But when I touched it, something opened. Not the chamber. Me. I saw places I've never been. Felt things I've never felt. It wasn't like watching a movie. It was like remembering someone else's life. Someone who isn't me, but is connected to me somehow. Keller raised an eyebrow. That sounds like hallucination. Tom met her eyes. I wish it were. They sat in silence for a while. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional creak of the wooden floor. Emma finally spoke. So if this is a message, like you said, what's it trying to tell us? Tom didn't answer right away. He stood up, walked to the mantel, and pulled down the old box, the one he found first. Inside, he took out the original pendant, the journal, and the faded photo of his great-grandfather. Everything we've found, he said, feels like a trail. Like someone left breadcrumbs, not for the world, but for this family. For the ones who stayed on the land. He pointed to the man in the photo. He knew. He saw something. Maybe he found more than one of those discs and couldn't open all of them. Maybe he had visions like I did. Either way, he chose to bury it. To wait. Emma looked at the pendant. And now it's our turn. Keller sat back, her face unreadable. Tom, you understand what this means, don't you? This isn't just a local discovery. If this object, this disc, does what you say it does, it changes everything. Our understanding of history, human cognition, memory. If word gets out, you'll have government agencies, private collectors, corporate labs, all crawling over this place in a week. Tom nodded. That's why we're not telling anyone else. You can't keep this secret forever, Keller warned. Something like this doesn't stay quiet. Then we hold it as long as we can, he said. Until we understand it. Until we know what we're dealing with. Because if we give it away too soon, they'll erase it. Rewrite the story. Claim it was theirs all along. Keller's eyes narrowed. You sound like you've been preparing for this your whole life. Tom looked out the window, across the frost-covered fields. Maybe I have. That afternoon, Tom and Emma returned to the chamber. This time, they weren't looking for more artifacts. They were looking for clues. For patterns. For meaning. The stone walls of the chamber had once looked plain. But under careful examination, Emma noticed something. The walls, she said. They're layered. Like pages in a book. She brushed off more dust and dirt. Faint impressions appeared, circular carvings, spiral notches, arranged in repeating patterns. Keller took photos. It's some kind of recording method. Not written language. More like data stored physically. Emma turned to her father. You said you felt pressure when you touched the pendant. Like something was pushing back. Tom nodded. Emma looked at the disc. What if it's not just giving memories? What if it's reacting to them? What if it's designed to unlock different layers of this place depending on who's holding it? Keller stared at her, then at Tom. Which means this site isn't just a vault. It's an interface, Emma finished. Suddenly, the structure wasn't just a chamber. It was a device, a translator, a story waiting to be activated by the right person at the right time. That night, Tom had another dream. But this time, it wasn't voices or visions. It was emotion, a profound, aching sorrow followed by a calm sense of duty. When he woke up, he sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "You waited long enough." He knew what needed to happen next. They couldn't hide forever, but they could choose how the truth was revealed. Not through press releases, not through headlines, through legacy, through the land, through the story passed down from one generation to the next. A truth that wasn't just discovered, a truth that was inherited. The snow came early that year. By the end of October, the fields were already blanketed in white, muting the landscape, softening the edges of everything. From a distance, the Grady farm looked like just another quiet, forgotten piece of land, tucked away in rural Wisconsin. But up close, everything had changed. The dig site was now covered by a tarp reinforced with steel stakes and camouflage netting. Dr. Keller and her team had packed up most of their gear, but a small trailer remained, parked near the barn. Inside, they cataloged every note, every symbol, every scan. It had become less of an archaeological study and more of a puzzle. A living one. The pendant had been locked in a fireproof box. The disc? Wrapped in a protective casing and hidden inside the house, beneath a floorboard Tom had once repaired with his father as a boy. Safe, Tom had said, but not buried. Outside forces hadn't stopped poking around. There were still cars that lingered too long near the property. Visitors who claimed to be lost, but always seemed too curious. And that same black SUV returned, 3 times. Never getting out. Never speaking. Watching. Tom started keeping a loaded rifle by the front door again. Not out of fear, but readiness. Emma stayed longer than she'd planned. She set up in her childhood bedroom, turned her old desk into a makeshift workstation, filled notebooks with theories and questions that didn't have answers yet. One night over dinner, she asked, "Do you think this thing changes us, Dad? Like permanently?" Tom took a long breath. "I think it wakes us up to what we forgot was always there." And what was that? He looked out the window. That the past isn't dead. It's just been waiting for us to listen. Dr. Keller returned a week later with a new piece of information, one she hadn't shared over the phone. She placed a document on the table. A copy of an old land registry from 1902. "This is from the State Archive," she said. "It's a deed transfer from a man named Jonathan Grady to himself." Emma frowned. "That doesn't make sense." Keller nodded. "Exactly. Except for one difference. The second Jonathan signed with a middle initial. Jonathan E. Grady. There's no record of a Jonathan E. Grady in this state. Not in any census. But the handwriting? It's identical to the first." Tom stared at the paper. "Could it have been a mistake? Or a message," Keller said. "A way of signaling that something changed, someone changed." Emma whispered, like he wasn't the same man anymore. It was a chilling thought. Whatever was buried in that chamber hadn't just been protected by Jonathan Grady. It had transformed him. The memories, the visions, the warnings in the journal. They weren't just notes, they were the fragments of someone who had touched something bigger than himself and lived with the weight of knowing. Tom began reviewing his own dreams more carefully. He started writing them down, comparing details with the symbols carved into the stone walls. Some of them matched. Some of them responded. Late one night, he pressed the pendant against the edge of the disc once more, just to see if the connection still worked. The reaction wasn't violent, but it was real. The symbols on the disc shimmered, just for a moment, and a soft hum filled the room. No words, no images, just sound. And deep in his bones, Tom knew. The disc wasn't finished speaking. Emma and Keller debated whether they should send samples to a private lab. Part of them wanted answers. But every time they considered taking the disc off the property, something stopped them. It didn't feel right. It felt like betrayal. So they chose to stay silent. But silence has its own cost. The local news ran a story about the Grady farm being involved in a historic excavation. Details were vague, but the headlines were loud enough to draw attention. Within days, letters came. from universities, from private buyers, from shell companies offering cash for the land, sight unseen. Tom didn't even open them. One afternoon, a man arrived at the front gate with a briefcase and a contract. "I represent an investor who'd like to acquire the property. In full. With bonuses for discretion." Tom asked him one question. "Have you ever put your hands in the soil?" The man blinked, confused. "I'm sorry. Your hands," Tom repeated. "Have you ever dug with them?" I don't think so." "Then you can't afford this land." He turned and walked away. The man left without another word. As winter deepened, so did the mystery. The disc remained quiet, but the chamber below started showing signs of change. New markings appeared, shallow grooves along the base of the pedestal. Not freshly carved, just newly visible, like time or exposure was peeling back layers that had been dormant for decades. And with them, more questions. Emma stood at the edge of the shaft one morning, staring into the darkness below. "It feels like it's growing," she said. Tom stood beside her. "No," he replied. "It's waking up." Whatever they had uncovered wasn't done. And neither were they. Spring came slowly to the Grady farm. The snow melted in patches, revealing dark, rich soil beneath. A soil that had held more than crops, more than roots. It had held a secret that changed everything. But the land hadn't changed the way people expected. There were no headlines, no museum exhibits, no flashy documentaries, because Thomas Grady chose something else. He chose to protect the story. Not hide it, not bury it again, but protect it, by living it, by guarding it, by letting it become part of something bigger than just discovery. The chamber remained sealed under a reinforced structure now, built to withstand weather, weight, and time. Only those who knew the truth had access. And none of them were in a hurry to share it. Because some truths aren't meant for the world all at once. Some truths need to grow slowly, like corn from the ground. Carefully, intentionally. Dr. Keller came and went. She sent more researchers, all sworn to silence, all handpicked by her. People who understood that they weren't just documenting history. They were participating in it. Emma stayed. What started as a visit became a decision. She left her job in Chicago, rented out her apartment, took over part of the farm with a focus on restoration and conservation. "I think it's time someone younger started listening to the land," she told her father. Tom smiled. "About time one of us did." Together, they built something new. Not just a farm, not just a legacy, but a living connection to what was buried and what still pulsed beneath their feet. There were still moments of uncertainty, of fear. Some nights, the disc would hum faintly from its hidden place beneath the floorboards. Some mornings, new markings would appear on the slab down in the chamber, thin lines like veins spreading across the stone. The site wasn't finished. Whatever was resting there had more to say. But Tom had learned something deeper. It wasn't just about what had been hidden in the ground. It was about what had been buried inside himself. His belief that everything had to end. That when crops failed and bills piled up and people left and love died, that it meant the story was over. But this land, this mystery, had shown him something else. That endings are often disguised beginnings. That sometimes you have to hit rock bottom just to uncover what's always been waiting underneath. A legacy doesn't live in titles or deeds or money. It lives in the hands that work the earth. In the eyes that recognize symbols where others see stone. In the hearts willing to listen when no one else can hear. The man who was once ready to sell it all now stood every morning on his porch with coffee in one hand and gratitude in the other. Not because everything made sense, but because it didn't have to. Emma took over more each day. She worked the soil, walked the fields, read the journals left behind by those who came before. She added her own notes, her own reflections. And when the time came, she'd pass it down too. A story written not in ink, but in dirt, in dreams, in choices. One morning, a letter arrived in the mailbox. No return address. Just a piece of paper with a single sentence typed in the center. "You kept it safe. We're not coming." Tom read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it inside the original wooden box. He didn't need to know who sent it. He already knew. The watchers had decided to leave them alone. The message had been received. And now, the story belonged to those who had earned it. So when people ask about the Grady farm today, they get a different answer. Some say it's just a quiet plot of land passed down from father to daughter. Some say there's something ancient buried deep in the soil. Others say there's a secret there, too powerful to ever be told. And maybe all of them are right. But for Thomas Grady, the farm is just home. A place where something unimaginable was found, but more importantly, where something human was restored. Hope, purpose, and the quiet, unshakable truth that some roots go deeper than we'll ever fully understand. Now, here's what we want to know from you. What's the biggest lesson you've learned from this story? What part of it connected with you in a way you didn't expect? Leave your answer in the comments below. We'd love to read your perspective on what this tale reveals about human nature, about trust, about legacy, and about listening. If this story moved you even a little, do us a favor. Like the video, and subscribe to the channel Wisconsin Farm Tales for more true and inspired stories just like this one, where the ordinary meets the extraordinary, and where every field might just hide a deeper truth. Until next time, keep digging. Not just through dirt, but through history, through memory, and through meaning, because you never know what you might uncover.